Okay, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. If I've finally made sense of all this, it's working. Uh, Welcome to a long overdue episode of Paranormal Encyclopedia. As always, I'm your host, Kevin Mears, demonologist in the Paranormal Encyclopedia. It's not going to be a real long episode tonight. We're mostly going to be going over where I've
Okay,
been,
good
what's been
evening.
going on, um, and all that good stuff. The first question is audio working?
Of Paranormal Encyclopedia.
Yes, the audio is working. Excellent. So let's start with the obvious, which is where I've been. And thank you, Lisa, for truth. I've appreciated the emails you've been sending, and I'm really glad to be back. Um, so there's been two things going on, which is why you haven't heard so much from me. The first, which is good, is I got a promotion at work. It's a big deal. It's more money. It's more authority. But it's kept me really, really busy. The other problem is my laptop broke down. I had no Wi-Fi. The hinge that kept the monitor and the keyboard together broke, and we just didn't have the money to get it fixed. We finally got that fixed this week. I was gonna stream last night, but I wound up having to work a really long day. So instead, you're getting me tonight. Uh, I'll just hold the microphone up like before. That should help the volume. Um, the show is obviously continuing. In fact, I have an announcement about that. So the thing I've been thinking about for a while is I love doing this. Obviously, I have no intentions of stopping, but I want to do more. I don't think one video a week's really enough. So a year or two ago, I had an idea to start a channel, um, not about the paranormal, but about my other interests, particularly the geeky interests. Um, and I've decided I'm going to wind up merging that with this. So there's going to be a side set of streams. Ideally, I want to try and do two streams a week now. One of which will be this, the paranormal. The other one will be what I'm going to call Grumpy Old Gamer because I'm 43 and I've been doing gaming in every form, video games, role playing games, card games, everything for longer than I've been in the paranormal. I mean, I've been doing it about 30 years. Um, I have a bunch of thoughts on that, and a lot of it relates to paranormal, so there'll be plenty of overlap. But you'll be able to check that out here. I'm going to move the only video I did on the other channel so far, which is a very popular one among geeks, or at least gaming geeks like myself, which is, which fictional character fits which of the classic nine alignments of Dungeons and Dragons. So you can all laugh at that. And I think there's some stuff. There'll be plenty of stuff in there, even if you're not a geek like myself or not a gamer. Um, but again, that's not going to stop the paranormal videos. I'm still going to be doing those once a week as well. I just want to diversify out and explore some things that aren't necessarily paranormal, but I still really enjoy and am passionate about. Um, let's see. What are the other? I feel like there's another announcement, but I'm forgetting what that is. Oh. Yeah, I'm the old man. He said from truth saying, I'm older than she is, barely. I'm a gentleman on the rest of the lady her age. Um, but I'm an old man. But the point is, there's more coming. The channel is not dead. It was just taking a nap while things got sorted out. Things are sorted. Unfortunately, because of my work schedule is extremely unpredictable. Um, so I can't. I'm going to try and go back to doing the paranormal episodes on Sundays. Probably, maybe not. Maybe tomorrow, maybe not. But in general, um, but it's probably not going to be a guaranteed every week is going to be the same day, same time type of live schedule just because I don't know when I don't know when I'm working tomorrow. I don't know if I'm working tomorrow. Um, and that's true pretty much every day of the week. But okay, enough about that stuff. Like I said, tonight I thought I'd do a Q&A. Um, Lisa or anyone else who's in chat or shows up in chat, feel free to ask me any questions. I'll go over some things I get asked all the time, and the one and only question I got asked when I put on my Facebook, hey, does anyone have any questions to ask me? Uh, just bear with me. Oh, good heavens. Okay, bear with me one second. Sorry, it was something related. Case in point, something related to my work. Okay, now let me see. What was the question? I thought it was rather funny, so I wanted to read it off from a Jewish friend of mine, actually. There we go. How many lows would a Rob Lowe rob if would rob Lowe's? Which is not really a paranormal question. Um, Though when I originally read it, it raised the question. I thought he was referring to a Rabbi Lowe, who's famously um, the guy who created the golem in the city of Prague back in the technically the Middle Ages, or is later. And the line between the Middle Ages and Renaissance is blurry. Um, Reformation and all that, but it's an interesting enough story for anyone who doesn't know it. The Jews of the city of Prague, well, actually, the Jews, if you didn't know, the Jews of Europe were under heavy persecution through the Middle Ages, mostly by Christians. Case in point, the Spanish Inquisition wasn't terribly concerned about witches, or even that much about heretics. It was more concerned with rooting out Jews and Muslims. Um, and a lot of them were either forcibly converted or killed. But there was a horrible myth, which is ridiculous if you know anything about Judaism, called the Blood Libel, in which it was believed that Jewish people were killing Christian children, or Christian babies to be particular, particularly unbaptized baby, and then baking their blood into the I believe in fact the bread they use for the Passover feast. And that's a good question. I'll come back to that in a second. I want to finish the story, but basically, the thing, if you don't know anything about Judaism, one of the big rules in Judaism, it's mentioned throughout the Old Testament in terms of kashrut law, aka kosher, is you cannot consume the blood of any living thing ever. That's a huge taboo and no-no. This is why, in fact, kosher has very specific butchering processes to drain the blood out of the animal that's being butchered. This is also the reason why the Jehovah's Witnesses cult, I'm sorry, it's a cult, refuses to take blood transfusion, even though that's completely ridiculous and immoral. But that's another discussion. But at any rate, Jews were under attack in the city of Prague, and the rabbi created what was called a golem. It's a creature, or it's a statue made out of clay, where the word emet is carved into the head. Emet being the Hebrew word for truth. But this, along with the various other spells and incantations, brought it to life. Golems are traditionally guardians, and then they gained power and they gained size the longer they lived, and eventually the rabbi would lose control of them, and they'd run amok, which is supposedly what happened in Prague, until eventually the E in emet was erased, turning truth into met, which is death, and the golem goes back to sleep. Now, Lisa for Truth asks, do demonologists believe demons are an ephemeral body or just dark energy? That's a good question. And if I'm misunderstanding what you mean by it, please feel free to correct me. But I sort of think it's a little bit of both. I mean, there's this idea you get a lot in modern Christianity of demons are just a dark force, or an incarnation of human evil. This is also very common in certain pagan, neo-pagan cultures, versus the idea that they are an independent being. I can't speak for every demonologist because we all disagree like every other type of Christian or religious person out there. I personally believe that they are creatures with an intelligence. They have a body. They're spirits, so their body isn't flesh and blood. It's ephemeral, certainly. It's spirit. It's something that is insubstantial. and I suppose arguably I don't want to get into the question of is an energy or matter because that if I try to start getting into that, I feel like I'm starting to get into physics, and I'm woefully underqualified to discuss the physics of the situation. But I do believe that I believe in my experience shows me that they are actual thinking, rational beings, not just energy, not just a manifestation of a human's dark side. Um, and this is a critical point that I get asked a fair amount when I've talked to atheists, and it's a very fair question. Um, but how do you know somebody's mentally ill versus how do you know someone has a actual demonic problem? Because it, I am not a psychiatrist. I do not have any psychological training. I am not qualified to do anything like that, which is why it's a very big deal for me. When I'm on case, it's like I don't give people any kind of medical advice, and I absolutely would never tell somebody to stop seeing a psychiatrist, psychologist, or any other form of therapist, or any other form of legitimate medical care, or ever to stop telling somebody to take their medications. Um, my response on those subjects is always go consult someone who's qualified. Um, the difference for me, the line for me, and it's a pretty clear one, is for me to qualify something as unabashedly demonic, something has to be going on that falls entirely outside of the bounds of abnormal psychology. Not just, you'll see some demonologists who will say, well, the actual complete loss of identity that possession involves is outside of psychology, even, and as far as I understand, there's some truth to that, because dissociative identity disorder, or what we used to call multiple personality disorder, isn't true separate, completely distinct personalities. It's more a strong association. But that's a complicated subject that somebody more qualified than I should really be getting into. But whether that's true or not, that to me isn't good enough. If you have objects being thrown across the room by no physical force, the classic thing you see in horror movies. If you have small children who suddenly speak fluent Latin, Aramaic, Hebrew, that they never had a lesson in. And I don't mean they can recite a couple of words, because just about everybody can, but actual fluency. And I had somebody ask a legitimate question on this, because there is a very interesting phenomenon with some stroke victims that they will suddenly start speaking another language. I did a little research on this, and again, I'm not a psychiatrist, but certainly not a neurologist, for God's sakes. But to my understanding, it's a language the person's exposed to. They're not, someone who's never had a single class in Latin and never known anyone who speaks Latin doesn't suddenly start speaking fluent Latin. And Lisa for Truth asks also a very good question: do we check for magnets and stuff? Yes, we do. I'm by no means an expert, but I have studied stage magic, and I do perform. The exorcist I used to work with was actually a very well-respected stage magician and a member of the International Brotherhood of Magicians. We do look for signs of trickery. It's not a big concern. It isn't to say it's never happened. I've never had a case where somebody deliberately tried to deceive us. But I know that Father Joe, the exorcist I worked with before he passed away, had a case he did in Philadelphia where they're sitting at the dining room table and the spoons are just moving back and forth across the table, seemingly of their own accord. Father, being a magician, did the obvious thing. He looked under the table and the guy just had a magnet and was dragging them around. The thing you find out, and I'm not saying that we don't have to be on guard for it, but the thing that you find is people who come to a demonologist usually aren't deliberately trying to fake it. That doesn't mean it's always true. Very, very often people who come to us don't have a demon in their house. They don't even have a ghost in their house. But usually people that reach out to a group like mine are in some type of psychological or emotional crisis. And a lot of the times this may mean that they're mentally ill, which is why we have to be on guard for that. But mentally ill people, in this case, legitimately believe they have a demon in their house. They don't see a need to fake it because they think it's there and then I'm going to see it. The other example you'll see often enough is people who aren't mentally ill actually will sometimes imagine a demon into their house. And this is very understandable psychology when you think about it, in my opinion, because the human brain plays tricks on us, and when something happens outside of your own natural experience, especially classic example, you go see a scary movie, you go see the Paranormal Activity, for example, and it scares you. I'm not saying that particular movie scared you, or it didn't. And movies in general make me laugh uproariously most of the time, but it's an example. Or The Conjuring, or any one of those movies. Now you go home. You go home late at night, and you hear creaks. You hear. Now I'm not saying footsteps, but houses settle. Anyone who's lived in a house of any age has heard it creak at night. I grew up in a house that was built when we moved in, and it creaked and made weird noises at night all the time. It wasn't because it was haunted. It was because it's a house in the country. When the wind blows, the shingles on the roof shift, and the rafters settle, and all those other weird noises happen. Now, most of us, very rationally, when we hear these things, think it's the house settling. But if it's very late at night, and you just saw a really scary movie and you're still kind of freaked out, sometimes it plays on you a little. Another good example of this is Reputations. I like to, my fiance Amisha and a lot of other people who've heard this story love to have me tell this story of a friend of mine who did a house in Texas where a murder had taken place. And everyone who had moved in since the murder moved out within a couple of days, saying the house was haunted and nobody wanted to live there. When my friend investigated it, she found out there was actually a family of raccoons living under the house. Now, if you know anything about raccoons, they make some really creepy and weird noises sometimes. So, they scream, things like that. And also, it's late at night. You hear scratching from inside of the wall. You know it's a house that the murder took place in. Your imagination runs away with you. And even otherwise very rational people get spooked. Have I ever been called to consult on conversion disorder? Do you think other demonologists deal with that? It may just be that I'm having my graying brown hair's gone blonde or something, but I'm not remembering what conversion disorder is off the top of my head, so I honestly can't say. I'd set my microphone down and look it up, but then I'm going to be, my volume's going to go down. But again, if I'm going to say a house is haunted, I want to see something happen that doesn't fit natural explanation. Oh, hey, Lord Ruin, welcome to the chat. Good to see you. If I want to say somebody is possessed, something really outside of the bounds of psychology and psychiatry has got to be going on. The reality is also the vast majority of people aren't, even the ones who have a legitimate demonic problem in their house are not possessed. It's usually something else going on. And the horror movies like to dramatize that you need a whole full-blown exorcism and, screaming in Latin and all these crazy things. Lisa says it's conversion is a psychological disorder manifesting physically. I'd need more specifics than that. Hey, Serenity. Awesome, I've got listeners. That's always nice. But th- there are certainly examples, and I don't know if this is conversion or not, but I know that oh, okay, so like someone who seems to have had a stroke but did not. So like Munchausen and what's the other one? The one that the one that's really famous. Or not Munchausen per se, because usually they actually cause the symptom. Um, Dang it, I'm trying to think. Hypochondriasis, where you and yes, Serenity, you're absolutely right. Usually people die before it gets to the point of a possession. And I'll circle back to this, but I want to comment on the conversion. But I'm thinking of hypochondriasis, aka more famously known as hypochondria, where someone convinces themselves they're ill, and the power of the mind being incredibly potent. If you're convinced enough that you have a disease, you sometimes actually start showing symptoms of the disease. This particularly ties into a phenomenon known as psychosomatic death, or more colorfully, they call it voodoo death, where if somebody really strongly believes that they've been cursed, they might very well wind up becoming sick and die, even though there's no medical reason for them to do so, just because that belief is so strong. Um, you could argue, people could argue, and people do argue. Annalise Michelle's a really interesting case. I'm actually currently working on researching and planning on doing an episode on. She actually was suffering from epilepsy, or at least she was diagnosed with epilepsy. They later would claim. I mean, here's what I know mostly from the movie, um, is that she was diagnosed with epilepsy. Her priest became convinced that it wasn't epilepsy; it was actually demonic possession. Um, and they performed an exorcism. They took her off food. They starved her, and they told her to stop taking her medications, and eventually she died horribly. Um, I do not know enough about the Annalise Michelle case, which is what Emily Rose was based on, to directly comment on whether it was legitimate or not. I do know that during the exorcism, as you see in the movie, she did start to speak in German, Latin, Aramaic, Hebrew. Um, but as they also say in the movie, there's potential explanation for that, insofar as she had some training in those, some education in those languages. Um, I will say this one thing that's commonly misunderstood, particularly by Protestants, but sadly some Catholics, and this was an example of it, misunderstand it as well. There is a very legitimate point within an exorcism about the importance of fasting. What gets misunderstood, the Bible's, Jesus in the Bible says that there's certain types of demons that can only be cast out by prayer and fasting. Some people incorrectly interpret this to mean that the person being possessed is supposed to fast. They're not. It's the priest that's supposed to fast. A person undergoing an exorcism is under a great deal of psychological stress, and physical stress as well, and emotional, everything, spiritual, every type of stress there is. You don't want to add to that. It's not. It's not. I've never seen it recommended by Gabriel Armath, by Father. If you don't know, Armath was the late chief exorcist of Rome, by Malachi Martin, who was widely considered the leading expert on demonology until he passed. I never, Ed and Lauren Warren never would have certainly never suggested. My mentor, Lou Gentili, never suggested that you stop feeding somebody under a possession. Hello, William Bennett. You need to keep their strength up. You need to keep them safe, and you don't want the person to die. It's also pretty standard that it's even mentioned within the Roman Catholic ritual that you want to have you want to have a doctor involved. You want to have a psychologist, a psychiatrist. You want to have medical professionals involved throughout an exorcism. Actually, a lot of the times, when a priest is performing an exorcism, if at all possible, they'll have it in some kind of a psychiatric or other hospital where the person can be monitored, where the person can be restrained if necessary, because people do get extremely physically violent. And but you want to cover those bases, and I think the one criticism I think I would have of the situation is she stopped eating, she stopped taking her medications, um, and if, as the movie presents it, I mean, the movie presents it as they tried to get a doctor involved, um, and I've even heard rumors that they may have been trying to get her to eat and take her meds, and she was refusing. Um, but that sort of thing is really dicey to me. I can't. I wasn't there. I haven't deeply studied the case. But if it was me in a situation that severe with somebody with that serious a diagnosis, I'd want a medical doctor present at all times, and I would never give a client advice on taking or not taking their medications. To me that's a gigantic ethical violation. Since I'm not a doctor, I'm not qualified to make those judgment calls. What I would tell the person, and what I've told people in the past, is if you have questions about your medication, go consult your doctor. They went to medical school. I didn't. They are experts on that kind of thing. I'm not. And it's another thing that's commonly misunderstood, particularly specifically in the charismatic movement. Both within, and there are charismatic Catholics that misunderstand this. Not just. I don't want to feel like I don't want to be pricking on Protestants because Catholics mess this up all the time too. But there is this gross misunderstanding that disease and mental illness are actually all the work of the devil, and medications make things worse. And it's a horribly immoral, scripturally nonsensical idea. The Bible does talk about anointing the sick with oil. It talks about praying for the sick. There's no point in the Bible where it says don't go see a doctor. Never, don't consult doctors. Doctors were a thing at the time. In fact, Saint Luke, the believed. I'm not going to get into. There's a huge question of who actually wrote it, but Saint Luke, the man who's believed to have written the Gospel according to Luke, was a physician of the day. And Serenity, to answer your question, a registered nurse or or for that matter, an outright medical doctor is an excellent addition to a team, as are paramedics, EMTs, anyone with qualified medical training. Because you don't ever our goal is a demonologist's goal, mine or any other, that's worth their salt, is to help somebody in crisis. We do not want to make a bad situation worse by taking someone who has delusions, for example, and convincing him their delusions are valid. You want to do what's in the best interest of the person you're trying to help. And sometimes what's in the best interest of the person you're trying to help is to refer them to a competent medical doctor or a psychiatrist or a psychologist. I'm not proud. If if I can help somebody by sending them to a doctor, I'm happy to do it. My concern is that they get better. And I've had client, I've had women contact me who had, particularly I had a woman contact me whose daughter had a condition called PMDD. It's a severe hormonal imbalance that sort of resembles PMS, but it's PMS on steroids. You have a point, William. Let me get through my point and then I'll come back to that. But basically, it can make a person violent. It can make someone homicidal potentially. It causes severe rebellion and anger and things of that nature. But it is a medically treatable diagnosis. Her concern was the medication wasn't working for her daughter anymore. Her daughter was particularly angry about anything relating to religion or God. And I just told her, in all ethical consideration, talk to your psychiatrist again. Tell them that the medications aren't working. See what they can do. Particularly because all she was describing was, it wasn't objects being thrown across the room by an invisible force. It wasn't, the girl suddenly speaking a language she never knew. it was anger issues, it was emotional issues, it was behavioral issues, all of which have psychological explanations. So, and she wound up getting her, her doctor, talking to the doctor, getting her kid on new medications, and the problems started improving. Um, William Bennett says, pointless. A person's doctor has had many visits with the person and has a file on the person with a full workup, bringing an M to on the spot diagnosis like asking a mechanic without them seeing the car. That's true. Yeah, I mean, you're not necessarily bringing a doctor into an investigation to do an on the spot diagnosis. This is also particularly why in a case of an exorcism, the Catholic Church wants somebody to be seen by a qualified psychiatrist and a medical doctor and given a clean bill of health before they'll even entertain the idea of beginning an investigation for an exorcism. Because you can, but even once that's happened, it's generally considered a good idea to bring a doctor with you, just because even if there's something legitimately demonic going on, if the person is in fact possessed by a demon, they're going to be under considerable physical strain. People have been known to have heart attacks during exorcisms, strokes during exorcisms. Case in point, Annalise Michel died of starvation during an exorcism, as well as having severe epileptic problems because she was off her medications. And those are all things far better monitored by somebody with medical training than a well-meaning but unqualified investigator like myself. Because again, the last thing, it's not good news if you're in the middle of trying to cast a real demon out of a person, they die of a heart attack. They're dead. Okay, the demon's out of the world, but you killed the patient. That's not the point. That I think is more the concern. Is it's not trying to get the doctor necessarily to diagnose. That's why you send them to the doctor before they get involved. You get involved. You want the doctor to monitor the condition as it's going along. Plus, they may also recognize things that you don't. Because you don't ever want to mistake natural, particularly once an exorcism is done. If you're performing an exorcism over somebody who has grand mal seizures, to pick something out of thin air, you don't want to finish the exorcism, have them go into a seizure, and think they're still possessed. That's a really good question, Lisa, for truth, and I can easily address that. So Lisa asks, why didn't the church try exorcism before putting a witch on trial? For one, there's a difference between a witch and someone who's possessed. A person, or specifically a witch in medieval. Okay, first let me clarify before I get flack from any neo-pagans that listen to this in the future or who happen to be listening now. When I say witch here, I mean witch in the traditional historical context of someone who's made a deal with Satan. I don't mean neo-pagans. I don't mean all the million other modern definitions for the word. Now is not the time to get into debate about which meaning is which, pun intended. But for the purpose of the discussion, if I mean witch, that's what I mean. Because we're talking specifically about the witch trials and why weren't they exorcised. Someone in that case who's actually made a deal with the devil, one, they're not necessarily possessed, although that often does happen. Two, the thing about exorcisms, if the human soul inside doesn't want an exorcism, if they don't want to be rid of the demon, you can't get rid of the demon. The church believed that these women had consciously made a deal with the devil for power. You can't, if you would cast the demon out of the person, if there's a demon there, if they cast the demon out of their surroundings, they'll just summon it back. And that's even assuming that they thought that way in general. I mean, usually, it wasn't and for that matter, there are times when the church did involve exorcism in the trials to some extent. If you read the Malleus Maleficarum, which is the medieval witch hunter handbook, basically, it does talk about rituals of exorcism. In fact, you see the beginnings of the prayers that became the Ritual Romanum that the Catholic Church uses already written out there, and there's references there, and there's references in the Roman Catholic histories that the core prayers that make up that exorcism go all the way back to the original um, apostles. And yeah, Serenity makes the excellent point that one of the many things that The Conjuring got right is that what saves her in the end, what for that matter saves her family, is their love for each other. The Conjuring is a very good movie. It gets a great. It's from what I understand, it's not terribly accurate to the Perron case, which is what it's based on, but it is very accurate to demonic attack in general, except that demons aren't human spirits. Demons can occasionally force human spirits to work with them with their damn souls, which is a whole other thing. And I don't. And the Bathsheba thing, it's a weak, particularly given they tied her to one of the women that were executed for witchcraft in Salem, and the women executed for witchcraft in Salem weren't witches. There is the absolute one fascinating instance with that I'll get back to, because I find it unspeakably cool, even though it's not witchcraft in my opinion. But the thing you're running into is that, and I'm losing my train of thought. But right, so the one point of contention I've seen raised and is that at the end of the movie, Ed Warren performs the ritual of exorcism, and technically under Catholic law, lay people can't do that. And Lorraine herself commented that Ed would never have performed an exorcism. Now, I'm not saying Ed performed the exorcism. I wouldn't know. I wasn't there. I wasn't even born yet. But I did consult an exorcist on the subject, and in fact, in those circumstances where it was a matter of life or death, where if they took the woman out of the house, she would have died. If they waited for an actual priest to show up, she would have died. In that specific instance, a qualified individual who knows what they're doing, like Ed, is authorized to perform an exorcism. That doesn't happen a whole lot. But in the extraordinary circumstances laid out in the movie, what happened is perfectly legitimate. Believe it or not. So one of the obvious mistakes is actually not a mistake, funny enough. I really should research. I know more about the second Conjuring movie because I've read the books and I've actually heard the actual case, the Enfield Voices case. I've heard the audio recordings and Lorraine got in that house. Not the Bill Wilkins one, but there's a very famous recording from Enfield of two spirits that identified themselves as soldiers named Ed and Fred, who were both dead. And they're not Christians, they're soldiers. Because I had to ask them if they were Christian. And it's an interesting thing, particularly because it's a case where it's very hard to or I can understand it pretty well growing up on Doctor Who, but Ed had a hard time, and other people have a hard time because the Cockney accents are really thick. Now, a common complaint that you see is that the girl was faking it, and in fact she was caught faking some of the phenomenon. Was it all fake? Arguably not, given recordings and accounts were actually made of these voices manifesting when the house was empty. The investigators were the only one there. The girl that was supposedly faking the phenomenon wasn't in the home. William says, for untrained investigators, I always recommend they just have a legit exorcist as a contact. Better to pass the risk of things going bad onto the church than risk jail time. I think that's actually a pretty good piece of advice. It's not always easy, just because there's a whole thing with exorcism that you have exorcists and deliverance ministers. Exorcists are specifically people who use the use some variation of the formal ritual of exorcism. You mostly find them in the Catholic Church, Roman Catholic Church, the various Orthodox churches, the Coptic Church, Anglican and Episcopalian. They use a very formalized ritual that works through the hierarchy of the church. Deliverance ministry is more often the work of Baptists, and more specifically, it's the work of Pentecostals and Charismatics, which is what you see more often on TV with come out in the name of Jesus and hitting people in the head and knocking them flat and calling it slaying in the spirit. And actual exorcism is preferable in my opinion because when there's two basic ways of trying to get rid of a spirit. There's actually a bunch of ways, but in a religious context, there's broadly two ways. One of which is a prayer for deliverance, which is what deliverance ministry is. The other is an exorcism. Anyone can do a prayer for deliverance, and it's the St. Michael's prayer. It's praying for God to cast out, house blessings are a form of deliverance, are very effective. And exorcism is something different. The exorcism comes from Latin. It means to bind by oath. Which all gets into you need to get the spirit's name, and then its true name from its own lips, and then that gets cast out. And on top of that, the bigger difference is where prayer, anyone can do the prayer for deliverance. The reason why formal exorcism requires the involvement of a priest, specifically a priest with explicit permission from a bishop or higher, or for that matter, a bishop himself, is that it brings the full weight of the church and the authority of the church against the spirit in the house. Lisa, what are you calling BS on specifically? I'll try to address it. Is it one of the comments? Is it something I said? Okay. But that's kind of the difference. And the thing is, finding a deliverance minister is really easy. Go to the right denomination in your church, in your town. There's probably at least even odds that you'll find somebody who claims he can do it. Finding an exorcist is much harder. In theory, every Catholic diocese in the United States, really on the planet, but certainly in the United States, is supposed to have an exorcist. Oh yes, and I'm getting to that. But deliverance is I don't want to say always, because there are deliverance ministers that actually do make an effort to do things properly and get I've met people that would call it that get doctors involved and things and do those types of things. But on the whole, that's the other big difference of the churches. If you get an actual exorcist from the church involved, they're going to get it. They want psychologists, psychiatrists, medical doctors all involved. They want this person getting a full workup saying there's nothing medically or psychologically wrong with them. Something else has to be going on here. Deliverance ministers, on the other hand, they're a good deliverance minister, so don't misunderstand me. I don't mean every single person that claims it, but there is a large subsection of them that are really just a form of faith healer, and that will get into very immoral and dangerous territory. These are the ones that are more often to say, stop taking your medication because taking your medication is a sign that you don't trust God, or that I can magically heal you of cancer and now you don't need to get radiation, chemotherapy or radiation or actual medical treatment, and you will get the really the crazy ones that claim that all disease is a form of demonic possession. They will cast out that demon of cancer, and now you're cured of cancer just because. And it doesn't work that way. That is disgustingly wrong. I have said many times on this channel, and I stand by it. If you're a Christian, by all means, ask people to pray for you when you're ill. There are studies that suggest that may help, particularly if you don't know that they're praying for you, strangely enough. But for God's sakes, go see the doctor. Take your medication. There's an old proverb that I think applies here. Man sitting on his front porch, watching his neighbors scramble like crazy, loading up their cars to drive out of town. One of the last neighbors out looks at him and goes, "Don't you know there's a flood coming? Come on, we got room in our car. You can come with us." And he looks at him, "No, it's all right. God will provide." And he continues to sit there, and eventually the flood comes. Waters get high enough. He's got to go inside. He's got to go up to the to the second floor. Boat comes by. Come on, get in the boat. It's getting worse. It's going to get higher. You got to get out of here. No, I'm okay. God will provide. Finally gets so high that he has to get to the very roof of his house. Everything in the neighborhood's flooded. Helicopter comes through, drops a ladder. Come on, this is it. You're going to die. No, God will provide. He drowns. He gets to heaven. God immediately is furious. With the minute he sees St. Peter's like, "I want to talk to God. This isn't right." St. Peter takes him to God. Because what happened? I trusted you to help me, to save me. And God looks at him and goes, "What do you want?" I said 3 different people to save you. Do not ever forsake medical treatment because you think God is going to magically heal your disease. I am not saying, spontaneous remission is absolutely a thing. Sometimes people get better and we do not know why. But as Serenity aptly pointed out, don't see prayer or the laying on of hands or the anointing of oils as a substitute for medical treatment. It's stacking the deck. It's, you know what? I'm going to go do every single chemotherapy treatment. I'm going to go get all the radiation. I'm going to take every drug my doctor tells me to take. And I'm going to pray to God for good measure. It's better to live because you got the treatment than to die because you thought you believed that the faith healer going, "I cast thee out, demon of cancer," solved your problem. That also goes for homeopathy. That goes for all of the other alternative treatments. I've come down hard on alternative medicine a lot. But the reality is, if you want to take homeopathic remedies, it's not really going to hurt you. Mostly because it's not actually going to do anything. But don't forsake medical treatment for something that has no medical evidence behind it. There are many things in this world that science does not understand. Lots of scientists will be the first, including the most skeptical of them, will be happy to tell you that. But don't ignore the things that science does understand, chasing what you think it doesn't. Is there a problem with the cam? Shouldn't be. And granted, there are alternative treatments or exceptions to that. B vitamin, and I use vitamin in the loosest sense because it's not one at all. B17 is a perfect example of not only does it not do a damn thing, it's actually dangerous. Because what we call vitamin B17, aka latral or amygdalin, breaks down into cyanide in the body. And they will tell you that only happens under special circumstances. Yes, that's true. It only happens under specific circumstances. Digestion is one of those circumstances. You eat the stuff, it will become cyanide. If you take a very small amount of it, it's not going to help you any, but it may not necessarily kill you. If you take larger doses, like they tell you to, it will kill you. Oh, they call it complementary alternative medicine, or CAM now. Um, and my computer's starting to die, so we're gonna have to wrap this up soonish. Um, it's basically all. I think it's all the idea of pairing alternative medicine with actual medicine. I'm very leery of that, just because there's an old joke in the skeptic critical thinker community. Do you know what they call alternative medicine that works? Medicine. I mean, there are some things that fall under um, alternative medicine that actually work. There are any one of a number of herbal remedies that actually have proven medical benefits. Um, Granted, a lot of the, we get a number of our medicines from plants and herbs. Um, it's not necessarily, there's a mistake, and it's actually called the naturalistic fallacy, where people assume that because it's natural, it's automatically better, which isn't actually true. The perfect example of this is there's a plant, foxglove or digitalis. Um, it is poisonous on its own. If it's refined, it's safer, and it is actually a heart medication. But there's actually a synthetic form of it that not only is safer, but um, but not only is it safer, it has fewer side effects than the one that's directly derived from the plant. The synthetic is better than the natural. Um, yeah, William Bennett's right. Always question anything that isn't recommended by your doctor. There's plenty of good information on the web. Quackwatch is a very good website that has a lot of medical information. Um, Science-based medicine is another good website. Do your research, think it through, and talk to a doctor. Always talk to a doctor. And again, if you want to try, if it's something mine, like Serenity pointed out, I have severe knee problems. I was born with them. She bought me, I want to say, this eucalyptus um, liquid soap thing, and one night, my knees were really bad, and she's like, "Oh, let's try it." Used it to make a bubble bath, and I am extremely skeptical about that kind of thing, but I'll give credit where credit's due. It helped. Um, does that mean? But again, it's not I didn't stop taking actual medicine in favor of that, which is not something I ever recommend. If you want to experiment with alternative, go for it. I mean, there are some things that are alternative, and herbal remedies are not the only thing. Chiropractic does not do most of the things people claim it does, but it is about as effective on certain types of muscle and back pain as a deep tissue massage. Um, Acupuncture, while it will not cure your disease, it actually can provide some stress relief, and it can actually work as an analgesic um, to help relieve pain. Hypnosis certainly has benefits with relieving pain and other things of that nature. Um, but again, supplementing actually traditional medicine, not replacing it. Actually, there's always a funny story with hypnosis that the priest friend of mine had a case where a woman was going through a very difficult pregnancy. They couldn't put her on. She was in severe pain. She couldn't be putting her on much more meds for medical reasons. As a Hail Mary pass, they tried medical hypnosis, and because there was nothing else they could do, and they had done everything else medically they could do. And not only did it actually help with the pain, she wound up blanking out the entire agonizing experience, which was definitely a benefit. But, anyhow, Serenity's saying she got a weighted blanket, which helps with her depression. Depression is particularly a thing that, while again, I would never, ever, 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 ever tell someone to stop taking antidepressants. That's a recipe for pushing somebody into a suicide. That said, exercise, meditation, spending time outdoors, and things of that nature are wonderful, safe, natural supplements to medication. That whole thing that, these aren't antidepressants with pictures of meds, this isn't a picture of the great outdoors, they both potentially are. Um, and no. Oh, cool. And National Institutes developed that now has a dedicated cam branch. Because the reality is, yeah, there is some truth in what we call alternative medicine, and doctors are aware of this and doing the research. And even the thing that there isn't, if it isn't something outwardly dangerous like Laedril, there is the reality that the placebo effect is a thing, and placebos do have a profound influence on things like pain management, and even I want to say Parkinson's symptoms can be relieved by a placebo. So even if it doesn't have any medical value, it may well wind up helping you for a psychological reason. And in reality, is if it's just a sugar pill, it's not going to cause side effects. But again, these are things to discuss with a doctor or to supplement, not to replace actual medicine. As always, I should point out I am not a qualified, if it needs to be said, I'm not a qualified physician. Nothing I'm saying here is medical advice. If anything, my recurring point here is to say, go consult a medical professional instead of me. But my computer's going to die shortly. And I had meant this to be a relatively short stream. There will be another one in the next few days. Does anybody have a last question before I wrap us up for the night? How long has I been going? I'm curious. "57 minutes, apparently." So I've been. I love that I said it's gonna be a short stream, and my version of a short stream is still almost an hour. Yep, meds with depression are a small portion of it, which is why which I think is one of the reasons why it confuses people. So I would agree. That's also why if you're you usually should be going to see a